I am Tom Ray, and this is my story. It unfolded on a ranch in Montana starting in 1940. Throughout the 40s, we ran this ranch and we grew some livestock, chickens and turkeys and cattle, and our main cash crop were horses. My dad would trade horses from the Sioux Indians in the Dakotas and bring them to the ranch, and we'd break them and have good saddle horses. I first saw light of day June 14th, 1940, and it was soon time for my second birthday, which was taken in front of the little cabin where we lived along the West Rosebud River. I had no toys, so I entertained myself riding horses and picking flowers and things in nature. My grandpa Ray proudly holds my sister Carol and myself in front of his house on the same ranch where I was raised. My sister Carol gives my cousin Margie and myself a ride in Margie's little red wagon. My cousin Jesse smirks in front of the camera. It was my hobby beating him up. My mom took us on a train 300 miles to her sister's place. Jesse was there, of course, and I beat him up every day, and my mom had to cut the trip short because of that. We played with all kinds of animals and in the creek a whole lot. We went fishing in Flathead Lake. My uncle, James Alexander, is pulling a hand line in. You hook a bunch of nuts and bolts on the hand line and just throw it out in Flathead Lake and catch these sockeye salmon or kokanee. And the fishing was good. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, there's a little billy goat that needed to be roped, and by now I'm riding a horse pretty good. We go to my Uncle Earl's to help him put up some hay. Near Vale, Oregon, he had mules and horses he used at that time, and also a neighbor brought a hydro loader in to stack the hay. His wife Molly run the team of mules to buck the hay. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, everything on the ranch needed to be roped, and whenever someone would come, we'd all gather out in front of the barn and play with ropes and cattle, and there's always something needed to be ridden. Jerry Honest was trying his luck at riding a calf, but then the inevitable happens. Winter comes along and it's cold and snowy, but still my little pony that Dad bought for me, named Firecracker, needed to be worked, and I was supposed to do it. It looks like I wasn't having real good luck with Firecracker, but he reared up, and that's a no-no. And so Dad gave him a quick lesson on that. In the middle of the winter, my cousin Betty Jane and Francis rode their horses up to our place. We had a nice herd of cattle. My colt, named Flower, needed a good riding. But then the inevitable happens. We have to go to school. So we went to the little cobblestone schoolhouse at Fishtail, Montana. We had a few toys, and this is our teachers, Mrs. Bilson, and Mrs. Hogan. And they'd get out and play with us out on the playground. And then someone would ring the bell, and we'd have to go in and study. It wasn't my favorite thing to do, and that's me the one on the far right. I was always the littlest one of all. There's a crop of apples. My Aunt Virginia and May packed a bunch of apples. Horses were always a big thing. We'd ride 'em all the time. When someone would come, we'd go saddle up and ride. And that pesky dog, he should behave himself. And sometimes we'd ride 'em, and other times we didn't. Dad gives Firecracker, my little ornery Shetland pony, a peace offering of some tobacco, and those darn turkeys. I had to feed them, and sometimes we'd do this in the barefoot, and they'd tramp on your feet. My dad is out in his field of grain, admiring what nice grain he grew up on what we called up on the hill. It's what they call dry land farming. My sister Carol and I pick flowers while my dad checks his grain out. My sister and I got a bicycle. It was for both of us. By now, my dad is upgrading some of the farm equipment. He bought a tractor, and so we're no longer using horses for everything. He bought a hydroloader too. A relative of ours, Mrs. Close, holds her grandson Jack out in the hayfield. She was a rugged old pioneer woman from a homestead in Wyoming. My dad is breaking horses again, and I'm trying to break a calf, or is he trying to break me? My dad ties their head and tail together and lets them run in circles a little bit. But now it's time we have to work some of our range cattle. I'm learning how to hold them. At least I guess I am, but I just keep coming back for more. If you're not tough there, I guess you just don't survive. The community had no television or any other entertainment, so they'd get together for picnics and things. A lot of times it was on our ranch down in the cottonwoods near the river. My dad with his prize white horse and a nice foal. My dad and my Uncle Raleigh built this sort of a horse trailer they hauled stock in. We had by now a nice herd of sheep and some real good hogs and lots of horses. We even have time for vacation. We go the 300 miles to see my mom's sister, Arilla, and her husband, who was a logger. They had a sawmill, one that should ride the carriage. My Uncle James Alexander's riding the carriage on it, while June drives the caterpillar. And there's Jessie sitting on the caterpillar. Come down off there, Jessie, and let me beat you up again. By about 1950, my dad traded the ranch for a store, bulk gas, and everything at a place called Melville, Montana. I never was real happy here. We no longer have a barn or any animals to play with, and I went to Melville School. That's me, the little guy on the left. But now I'm starting to go hunting. This is my first bobcat. He wasn't too big, but he was nice. And then fishing, and we did catch the fish. Even though we were little guys, we caught the fish. I had a pet coyote and a pet skunk at the same time. I went hunting when I was about 10 years old, got my first antelope. There's my cousin Jesse and I holding up some fish. That's me again with some fish out of Cayuse Creek. We got some horses together, shoot 'em, and made a pack trip up in the crazy mountains to Moose Lake. By now, I'm getting a little older, and I'm getting bigger bobcats, and I had a little business where I hunted rabbits and hunted coyotes and things, and I got enough from the fur from selling these rabbits and coyotes to buy that old Studebaker car. There's me again with a nice specimen of a coyote. But by now, I'm starting to look at the opposite sex. And then I found here was Leona. She was a little farm girl that liked to ride horses, so we hit it off really well at first. I was so bashful I couldn't even talk to her, but Leona wasn't bashful, and she was the one that started the conversations. Old Sandy Harper's riding his horse Peanuts. He came and borrowed a rifle from me one time. He said he had his dog Ring had treed a bear, and he tied Ring up near the bear to hold him in the tree and came to borrow my rifle to shoot Mr. Bear. But Mr. Bear saw a rat and ran. I hunted most everything there was to hunt. I made a trip up in the Crazy Mountains and shot a mountain goat. We're going up in a basin in the Crazy Mountains. Before high school of a morning, I go down to the little spring down behind our house and shoot a duck or two. I set a trap and caught a bobcat. We took him home alive, and he sure did growl. We called a friend of ours that was sick to come and see the bobcat, but he was too sick to, so we hung the telephone receiver in the garbage can and let it growl. By now, the first 16 years of my life had passed by, and then I went moose hunting and bobcat hunting, and duty called. I had to go off to the Cold War with Khrushchev. I was stationed at a guided missile base near Detroit, Michigan. Here's myself holding a screwdriver. I've been working on one of these Nike missiles. Every time Khrushchev would sneeze, we'd have duty. But I was stationed near Detroit, Michigan, and Detroit was a totally frightening place for me. I couldn't even walk across the street. There was all the noise, the exhaust, and horns honking. But I learned, and I had a great time. While I was in the Army, my life changed again. My dad traded for a farm near Woodburn, Oregon. We had sheep and some fruit trees, cherry trees, and I grew a crop of sunflowers. They're like trees. My cousin Margie came out and we check out the corn and sunflowers. Then I met the love of my life, Margie, and she was a farm girl that knew how to milk a cow and drive a donkey cart. So we hit it off well at first and still are together after nearly 59 years. Margie was an athlete in her school. Our wedding was a very simple wedding. It didn't cost much at all. And the reception was held at St. Louis. And then, after a little over a year, here came our first kid along, little Lynette, and she had a pony she liked to ride. Then came the Columbus Day storm, when we lost a bunch of trees. But since I was dealt lemons, I'll make lemonade. So I hoisted them up on a truck, took them to a sawmill and had them sawed, and I built my first boat, an 18-foot cabin cruiser. We took it out on the ocean. What chances we took. And we sure caught the fish. There's Marge in that risque swimsuit of the time. And there's Annette. She's grown up and had a little fox. That one of our dogs killed the fox, Annette liked to cry her eyes out. We went hunting for black-tailed deer. Then I always wanted to build a house, so I just bought some lumber and built it. Started out and did it. And there's Margie. The swimsuits are getting more skimpy as we get up closer to the 70s. And our children, we have 3 now. Annette, Julie, and Dwayne. I built another house near Tillamook, Oregon, and I got a job as a park ranger. One of my jobs was to take care of the lighthouse at Cape Mears. Some of the people from the parks department were going to tear it down. I put up a really bad fuss about that and got it saved. There's Connie Bourget checking out the old Fresno lens that was shipped around Cape Horn in the 1800s on the sailing ship. There's a huge spruce tree in the park, and our kids stand around it. Then the octopus tree. There's Marge in the 1970s. And here's our whole family at a Christmas at my folks' house. And birthdays. I must have gained 100 pounds just going to birthday parties. Everybody's having birthdays by now. Then our park ranger job, we needed to put a fence around Cape Kiwanda. That was Phil Willett with the cigar. I brought my welder from home, and we welded up a platform and a set of stairs so we could lift them when the tide came in and at a storm. And it worked for a while. Then pretty soon the sea took over. There's Nadine in front of a piece of tail section off of B-17 that was wrecked in the park on Cape Lookout. There was the old wigwam burners near Tillamook at the old blimp base. It puffed smoke into the atmosphere, something terrible. Then at the park, there was always somebody getting in some kind of trouble, everybody working so hard at having fun. And so I climbed up on the cliff and rescued a guy. Here's a guy that didn't need to be rescued. It was too late for him. He had ill fate. And since I was a farm boy, it was my job to bag the dead bodies that come in. And so we'd bag them and send them to the undertaker. Then one of my park ranger jobs was to do the evening program for the tourists in the summer. We had an amphitheater, and so I needed some pictures of a crabbing boat crossing the bar. I waited till the sea built up right at the beginning of a storm. I went up to Garibaldi. I saw 2 sets of masts coming over the bar. Then I had camera trouble. I took it to the car and fixed it. When I got back to film, I see the Kilchis is up hammering and grinding on the jetty. They ground there for a little bit and not a thing I could do. But Marge took the car and went and got the Coast Guard. She's grinding away and breaking up fast on the rocks of the jetty as she's caught in a current now and moving offshore a little bit. And there's absolutely nothing I can do. Then I saw she was going completely under. We see a puff of black smoke, which means all compartments are flooded. And so I shoved the camera into my wife's 13-year-old nephew's hands and told him to keep it running. When I got back, he said he kept it running, but he couldn't find the little hole you peeked through. So I ran down the jetty looking for a long stick or a rope or even a piece of cable to throw to the guys to help get them up near shore. And unfortunately, I found nothing. By now, the captain's given the command, abandon ship. So The Basil boy moved in as close as they could due to the mast leaning outward, and she's caught in a current and drifting farther to sea, which is going to further complicate rescue efforts. Normally, when something like this happens, there's loss of life, but we were extremely fortunate not to have any loss of life here. The men took to a little life raft which became tangled in the rigging. None of them had a knife or anything, so they couldn't cut it free, and again the life raft sunk, dumping the occupants into an ice-cold, breaking sea. And these men are fishermen, they're not swimmers, they've never had time to swim. So the Basil boy started throwing things in the water for him to grab a hold of, and I talked to the captain later, and he said his whole life was flashing in front of him, and he looked ahead and he could see the white of a life ring thrown from the deck of the Basil boy. He grabbed it and drifted in to shore, and so did the other deckhand, and another one had jumped out on a rock and was safe. I run down the jetty as fast as I could, not finding a thing to help with the rescue, not even a good stick I could throw to 'em. But when I got there, I see they'd made it up to shore, and they were clinging on a big flat rock on the edge of the jetty, right down in the edge of the water. I crawled down there and told them, "We got to get out of here. There's going to be a big wave wash us out." And then we looked up, and here came a monster wave. The captain said, "Just hang on to the rocks for all you can." And so we all hung on to the rock as best we could. None of us were washed off, and then we climbed up on the jetty, and the ordeal was over by now. Here they come, walking up the jetty. The tall man in the lead is the captain, and the other man is one of the deckhands, and the other deckhand has already got out of the view by now, and they're bringing some of the life rings that were thrown off the deck of the Basil boy. Mournfully, the captain looks back at the spot where his boat once stood, the largest one operating out of Garibaldi. They've slipped off their shoes and they're in their stocking feet. Marge and I built a canoe and we started doing some trout fishing. Then I quit my park ranger job and built a new house. I'm painting it here up on a ladder. We backfilled it and have it about ready to be finished. And there it is, all finished up. Then I had some time for hunting and fishing. Marge and I went after everything we could hunt. I got a giant mule deer, and our son Dwayne was big enough to go hunting. And here he is with his first bear by now. We did lots of backpacking into Hell's Canyon. There's me pulling down on a bear on some of the cliffs of Hell's Canyon. We caught rattlesnakes and ate them. And then the canoe, we'd take it up the Snake River and hunt in the Hell's Canyon. Here's a nice black-tailed buck I got over near Tillamook. Then Dwayne and I both drew antelope tags for the southeast desert, and get 'em we did. We got one really nice big buck and another not quite as big. And there's Marge with that risque swimsuit from the early 80s, and we went to Hawaii in about 1981. There's me with a coconut from Hawaii. These were great times for us. Marge had a really good paying job running a big machine. They called it a barker, which fed the logs into the mill, and they did a lot of logs, like 100 log truck loads per day. But she got paid well, and we went on vacation after vacation. We even were able to go back to the old ranch in Montana where I was raised. It's been sold, and I don't know who owns it, but we went in and took a look. The old barn's still standing tall, as well as the granaries and the old garage that my dad built, and I even helped when I was a little kid. I got to see my Aunt Virginia and Uncle Raleigh after all these years of not seeing them, and they're both up in their 90s, but still the same old Raleigh and Virginia. It was so great to see them. And then I saw my cousin Betty Jane and her husband Francis. They're standing in front of the little house where I was first born. It had been moved down to their ranch, but still in good shape. And Francis is standing in front of his tack shop on the ranch in Montana. Betty and Francis are posing in front of the Beartooth Mountains on their ranch in Montana. We went down and looked at the old car. I have fond old memories when we were little kids, when we'd go down there. Their ranch joined ours, and we'd get in this old car and play for hours, and it's still there. We went down to look at the spot where our cabin once stood. Francis and Marge are standing right at the spot where it stood, but it had been moved down to their ranch. But it was so great to see all these old memories, which were still very vivid in my mind, but a lot of years had passed since I had seen these sights. My mom is standing in the kitchen on the old cabin where she did all of her cooking on an old wood stove. I remember of a morning when I didn't get up when she did. I could smell the smoke from the old wood and coal stove as she cooked breakfast there. There was a simple rock for a front porch. Now they've got a board there. But there's my mom standing in front of our old cabin that we once had. And then some other people came, other relatives. Ed and Mildred. On the left is me, Marge, Ed, Mildred, Francis, and Betty. And we went to the old school where I once went to school, the old cobblestone school. It's still standing, but at the time I was there were like 18 students, and now there's only one student. We saw a sheep wagon where a sheep herder has his horse and dog tied to it as he minds his flock of sheep. I went paddle fishing on the Yellowstone and Missouri River. We'd snagged these giants from the river, and they were great eating, and plus being a taxidermist, I was able to mount some of them. Then we went to a mine where my uncles James and June were doing some mining for gold. It's James, June, and my dad standing there on the back of a pickup near some of the places where they worked in the early 40s. They worked at these mines, and then they were closed for the war effort. And after the war, then they got the mines back again. I liked these mines so well that I told June I'd like one of these mines too. So he staked me off one, and I named it after Marge. We called it the Margie J. There's June working his gold pan. He always carried a gold pan and every time he saw a rock, he had to break it in two. And Marge is standing in front of one of those beauties of a barrel cactus on our mining claim. June is standing in front of his mining claim. I think it was called the Black Fox. And Marge and I went fishing for anything that swam. And there's Marge with a really nice big king chinook out of the Columbia River. Wow, I'd sure love to dig my teeth into that. They're really good. And Marge and I went marlin fishing down the Baja Peninsula. And here's Marge proudly in front of a couple marlin hanging from a cable. Marge and I made the trip down to the redwoods. That was a dream of mine from childhood. All the people in our community had gone to the redwoods, and so I finally did. My cousin Margie and her husband Glenn and their two girls, Heidi and Melody, are at our place for some holiday. Then we took a trip to Grand Teton National Park and Yellowstone. I took my folks both along to enjoy this trip to Yellowstone. By now, our children are growing up, and it's time for weddings. Annette was first with her wedding, and then Julie followed later. These girls were real busy courting. If they were going with a cowboy, they wore cowboy clothes, and if they were going with somebody else, they wore the appropriate clothes for it. Yeah, what a rush it was having teenage girls around. Julie graduated from high school by now, and so we're having cake for everything. More cakes went through our household than you can believe. Annette graduated from college, and Dwayne from high school, shown with his Aunt Margaret alongside him, holding his graduation cake. This was kind of a big deal, a graduation. Here Dwayne is standing with my mom and dad in our house after his high school graduation. Then Annette's wedding. Julie, Annette, Marge, myself, and Dwayne in the picture above. Shortly after Annette's wedding, then it's time for Julie's. Grandkids then started showing up. First was Rachel. She was a spunky little thing. Here she's shown with her mom and dad. It was time I needed to build an addition onto our house. Since we'd been to Africa twice hunting big game, and I had become a taxidermist, it was time we needed a place to put these things. Marge said she got tired of having to have a conversation through a bear. So all the grandkids are out here helping drive nails. I think they bent more nails than they drove, but at least it was a learning experience for them. With a lot of time and effort, this addition to our house started taking shape. I built it 2 stories, 24 feet by 24 feet, and that'll be real good for a while anyway. But I started doing taxidermy work in it before it was even finished, and Rachel was always on hand to help with that. Her favorite toy was a scalpel, and she did get cut finally one time with it, but she wasn't wanting to tell anybody she got cut. We by now have a cabin in Wyoming, and our grandkids go to Wyoming and try a little bit of fishing. And so we caught quite a few fish and had some great fish feeds. Then it's time for our 25th wedding anniversary. Julie had us to her place, and of course, we had a cake. And it seemed like it took forever to make the first 25 years. Then the next 25 years went a lot faster. Our whole family has grown, and they're in the picture. Our cabin in Wyoming served very well as hunting headquarters, where we went after deer, elk, antelope, and even moose. I built a nice porch on it so we had a good place to hang all of our animals. It was becoming more and more difficult to draw tags in Oregon and Wyoming, so we decided to try South Africa for big game hunting. There's me in South Africa posing with my kudu. What a great animal to hunt, and a hartebeest, another real fine eating animal, and a pretty good sized one. I got a total of about 20 animals altogether from South Africa. We saw giraffes, and Marge wanted a zebra for the grandkids. I said, well, I was raised on a horse ranch, and a zebra is just a form of horse. She says, well, you big wussy, give me the rifle. And so I gave her the rifle, and we had a zebra, which I mounted life-size for her. The Bushman people were working on this game ranch where we went, and there were lots and lots of them. And at first they were quite shy, but after being there a while and visiting with them, I found they were really fun people to be around. And this one is Gladys, and she was carrying buckets of water on her head. So I said, well, could I try that, Gladys? And she said that I could try it. So I put the bucket of water on top of my head and made an attempt to haul it around on top of my head. The Bushmen men were over alongside the skinning shed, laughing, they're just rolling laughing. And I said, this might have been a little bit funny. I struggled with this, but it wasn't that funny. What are they laughing at? And the guide told me, well, it's like a woman, it's strictly woman's work in Africa, that it would be like a man carrying a purse and wearing a skirt in this country. And so it's just something men don't do. So they found it very amusing. But it was really a wonderful experience. Pretty soon, they just let me struggle with it. And then pretty soon, Gladys showed me the proper way to carry a bucket of water on top of my head. This was an experience of my lifetime, going to South Africa and doing big game hunting and hanging out with the Bushman people. Here she showed me how to carry the bucket on top of my head. And hey, I'm not doing all that bad at all. The Bushman people were really great little people. They're a small people, and they have no real need for anything but just their basic, simple style of life, which I think is really great. It was kind of like when I was growing up in Montana. only we never had it that rough or that rusty, but somewhat similar. Then my grandkids are now growing up, and here they are posed in front of Marge's zebra. She said she wanted a zebra so the grandkids could have some, and that's my son's two children there. We did lots of salmon fishing in the Columbia River and drug these big old monsters that come up the Columbia to spawn. We drug them into the boat. Sometimes we turned them loose. If they weren't hooked just right, they got set free. And if they were hooked right, we'd take them home and have some great eating. And we always, most every time we went, we'd catch our limit. This one looks like he's going to get to go back and continue on his journey upstream till he finds the proper place to spawn. This guy doesn't look like he's that lucky. He bit the hook and we'll catch and eat him. Then we build a contraption to sail on the desert, the playa of the Alvert Desert. We built it with wheelbarrow wheels, and we got the sail at Hood River that they use for their sail machines on the water. They were out of date for them, but we didn't know the difference. And so we built this contraption, welded it up, and wow, was it a good one. We could say in a 20-mile-an-hour wind, you could go about 60 miles an hour as we went screaming across the Alvert Desert in this machine. Some people are really hooked on it. Since I was raised on a ranch in Montana that had one time been Crow Indian Reservation, I got real interested in the tools they made. That was an atlatl, a spear throwing machine. And then my grandkids are growing bigger and bigger, and Marge bought us a Honda four-wheeler to ride around on the desert. And it looks like the grandkids are really enjoying that. A group of brown pelicans fly around, and a rattlesnake decided he was going to have me. So I think he looks like he needs his head removed, and then it looks like we're going to have some good eating.